Begin the current Daf Mesechta Yevamos Daf Ayin Gimel. Begin 3 lines down at the top of the Yomid. But the Gemara continues the discussion from the previous Daf, which is still the opening halacha of our parak of Oral, which is regarding the Oral being forbidden. And Truma, we continue that theme regarding what's halacha of Oral regarding Meiser, which actually came up in the middle of the Gemara's discussion. The Gemara was presuming that it's going to be one way. Now Gemara now brings it as a question. Something to discuss in today's daf are, as we said, if an oral is allowed to eat meiser, similarities of truma and bikurim. This is with the Mishnah Mesechtes bikurim. Similarities of meiser and bikurim, where we contrast 3 different types of things: meiser, bikurim, and truma. The halacha of lava b'machlal say that a negative prohibition derived from a positive commandment has only the strength of a positive commandment, therefore one would not get lashes. It's like we said, the Gemara is going to discuss now regarding the opening halacha of our Mishnah. We said ha'oral lo yochel b'truma. Someone who's uncircumcised cannot eat truma. Now the Gemara asks, as the Gemara begins in the third line now at the top of the Amid, volume name of Rav Sheshes. That's from Rav Sheshes. Oral mahu b'meiser. What's the halacha of oral regarding eating meiser sheni? What's the halacha? And again, in the previous time, the Gemara had said it in the middle of the discussion that Malit ful yoim shkein mutter b'meiser, in contrast that the oral is going to be usher. But now the Gemara asks as a question: what's the status? So the Gemara explains: Ki heicha deyolav pesach meiser. Just like we learn out that the halachas of a korban pesach from the laws of meiser regarding le'inyan ninus, that it's going to be an oinen is forbidden to eat the korban pesach. Now that halacha of an oinen being forbidden is only written by meiser. It's not written by the korban pesach. But we learn out lo yichalti ba'ini. We learn out a kal b'chaymer, if by meiser hakal it's aser, for sure, kachim, the korban pesach is going to be aser. Okay, so now you can learn, as Taisus brings into discussion that this might be gzera shava, so you can learn the other way too. So you'll have now meisim and pesach. Learn now meisim and pesach, leina arlis. So just like an oral is forbidden by the korban pesach, so too an oral should be forbidden to eat meiser. Like just like you see pesach with a meiser, learn a meiser and pesach. Like the maybe no. Chamor mikal yolov. That which is more severe, the korban pesach, you can learn out like what we call a kal v'chaymer. That so you can learn out from mikal, from something meiser. If meiser, which is kal, has this halacha of an oin being forbidden, for sure by pesach. But kal v'chaymer lo'yalav, that you cannot learn out meiser, which is more lenient from as an isser from that which is more chomer of korban pesach. That maybe you cannot learn out. That's the Gemara's question: would we compare it because it's like a gzera shav, or would we say no, it's a kal v'chaymer, and that you cannot learn out meiser and pesach to say that an oral would be forbidden? So Amalahu, so he said to them, Rav Sheshes responded. He says, Timisua, we learned there's a Mishnah Mesechtes Bikur. What's the raya? So the Mishnah says like this. The Mishnah there is contrasting 3 types of elements of Truma, Bikurim, and Meiser. On this part of the Mishnah says, Ha Truma v'Bikurim. Truma, we know, is the first thing that's taken off, around 1/50th of the produce, and is given to the kohen. And Bikurim is the first of the 7 fruits. When they grow, right when they come out, you bring that up also to the kohen, to Yerushalayim. So on that Mishnah says, those 2 things, Truma and Bikurim, Chayav Naleim, they have certain similarities. First of all, Chayav Naleim Misa, meaning, if a tamei person eats either Truma or Bikurim, so then he's liable for the death penalty. Like it says, Umeisu boiki chalaluhu, they're going to die because they desecrated him. Now that says by Truma. How do we know by Bikurim? Because the Gemara tells in Makas Daf Yitzayin that Truma Yodecha refers to Bikurim. Which actually says the reason is because Yodecha, we find that when you bring the Bikurim, it says you bring it with your Yad, so we see that the terminology Yodecha is actually referring to Bikurim. So when it says Truma Yodecha, it refers to Bikurim, so we know that Bikurim is also called Truma, and therefore there it's also going to have the halacha that if one eats it in the state of Tum, it's going to be Chayv Misa. Second of all is v'chaymish. If a zar eats either truma or bikurim by mistake, he's liable for a additional penalty besides the principal, that of a fifth. In contrast to meiser sheni, it's not that case because a zar is allowed to eat meiser sheni. The only time you'll have chaymish by meiser sheni is when you're coming to redeem your meiser. Then you have to, if you're not bringing up, you just want to redeem money and bring the money up to Yerushalayim, then you have to add on a fifth. But that's not a penalty for a non-kohen who eats it. So that's only stringency by Truma and Bikurim. And Basur and Lazarim, they're also forbidden for non-Kahana, which Taisa discusses that seemingly that's already included in the halacha of a chaimish, because the whole halacha of a chaimish is when the Zar eats it. So what are you saying? This is 2 different halachas. So he says a few different approaches when, let's say, you wouldn't be chayiv, let's say you had less than the shiur. In other words, there are certain cases that it would be applicable to say asr lazar, even though you already said halacha b'chaimish. And the nichse koyin, truma bikurim are both properties of the koyin. Meaning he could use the truma bikurim to, let's say, be mekadosh isha, or to buy a vadam karkais or a non-kosher animal. But meiser was only given for eating, drinking, or anointing, and he cannot use it to engage a woman. Because as Rashi explains, this anonymous Mishnah is like Rameir, who says in Baba Kama of Samach Tesam Abayz, Meiser is considered Mama Gavai. It's not your money, Meiser Shein. Hashem says, come to my table and you could eat this food, but it's not yours. Now, as Rashi points out, although, wait a second, that's actually a leniency of Truma Bikurim. You're saying you could use it whatever you want, whereas Meiser has that stringency. Aren't you trying to tell me that what they have chumras? Still, it's counted as, because it's similarity between Truma Bikurim and contrast to Meiser. As the Gemara says in Bab Mitzvah, that is considered as a kula. Also, to nullify Truma Bikurim into a mixture of chulin, you need to have a ratio of 100 to 1. Contrast to Meiser, Bittul B'Raiv is enough, and you don't need to have 100 to 1. And Utunin Rechitzas Yadayim. You also have to wash your hands, even if they're just payers of Truma Bikurim. Because Stam Yadayim, which means to say unspecific hands that a person has, are considered rabbinically as a sheni l'tumah, and therefore it invalidates truma, because truma can become a shlishi. In contrast, by meiser and chulin, the halacha is, and the Gemara says chulin of kavod and alf. If someone's washing his hands with payers, he's considered actually megasei ruach. That's actually considered arrogant that he thinks he's going to wash his hands for that. So that's another thing that truma bikurim has that meiser doesn't have. And the final one is the herb shemesh. You have to wait for sundown, as the Gemara learns actually on the next daf and down the days, that it's full yoim. Some of the immersives of that day is actually mutter meiser, but it's forbidden truma, because truma have to wait for sundown. Says the Mishnah, this is all again just leading up to a raya, but again this Talmudic style, we're learning this Mishnah over here. These are things that apply to truma bikurim, which all these things we said, this whole list, does not apply by meiser. Azar may eat meiser sheni. It's Mama Gavaya, there's Bittul B'Raiv, you can eat without the time, you can eat right after Tefillah. Says the Gemara, okay, wait a second. The Im Isa. Now, if it would be true that Kal from Chomer you could not learn out, meaning, yes, Korban Pesach is forbidden for an oral to eat, but you cannot learn out Meiser HaKal, which is a more lenient halacha than Korban Pesach, because that's more lenient. You can't learn out a stringency from Korban Pesach to Meiser HaKal. And therefore, an oral, we don't have any source to say it's forbidden. An oral would be permitted to eat Meiser. Wait a second. Nisni, you should have said there in the Mishnah, oral asur behen. Should have said that Truma Bikurim, an oral is forbidden, that we already established on the previous daf, that Truma has halacha, that oral is forbidden to eat Truma. That's the opening halacha of our Mishnah, of our parak. Masha ain't came to Meiser. You should have said that's another difference that Meiser doesn't have. From the fact that you didn't say oral asur behen, apparently because oral asur Meiser sheni. That's the raya that Rav Shesha wants to bring to show from gespart from this Mishnah Bikurim that oral is forbidden to eat Meiser sheni. Says the Gemara, no. Talmud V'Shaya. It's a classic Talmudic response that no, we didn't say everything. We said certain things, but ma imgalis. We left over, and this is one of the cases that we left over that really we could have said as a difference. Says the Gemara, my shai, the high shai. We don't leave over just one thing. What else did we leave over that we're saying we left over, and that you want to say maybe oral is permitted to eat meiser sheni? Says the Gemara, I'll show you shai dukatani seifa. I'll prove to you, because look at the seifa of the Mishnah, and in the seifa you'll see that there are cases in that Mishnah that left over. So from the fact that in the seifa we left over, could be in the ratio we also left over. What did we leave over in the seifa? Now again we jump back into that Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Yesh b'meiser b'bikurim. There are certain halachas that apply to meiser and bikurim, masha enkim b'trum, which do not apply by trum. What's the things that meiser and bikurim have in common? Shameiser b'bikurim tu'unin havas makam. They need to be brought to Yerushalayim. In contrast to truma, could be eaten anywhere out of the Yerushalayim. Truma doesn't have to be brought up. Bikurim has to be brought up, but basically you have to bring it Alamakam, and so to Meiser Shein has to be, we know, has to be eaten within Yerushalayim. Second of all is Tu'un Vidur. They need a confession, which regarding Meiser it says Bi'arti HaKodesh min Habayis, and regarding Bikurim it says Hin Hevesius Reishis. which Taisus brings up machlekes regarding when do we do beer by Bikurim? Is it also by like Meiser at the end of 3 years, or is it every year? Al Kaponim, but they both have that you have to do beer, and you have to say a confession, and va'asurin. Oh, that's another case that comes up. But the first is the halach of confession. Va'asul la'inin, and as Rashi says, even for Bikurim, that's the gears it should be, meaning Meiser is, we know is also for an Einim, because that's a pasuk in the Torah by the Vidu, Allah Chalti ba'Einim Imanu, that's by the Vidu Meiser, but it's even by Bikurim. But Rabbi Shimon Matter, Rabbi Shimon says no, it's not true. He disagrees on that point. He says that Bikurim is actually permitted for an Einim, and the Gemara is going to explain later on their reasoning for their machlekes. And the Chayavim bebir, that you have to do beer for Bikurim and Meiser Sheni, where Rashi seems to say that it's both of them at the end of the 3rd year. Where if let's say someone delayed his Meisus, even though here he's saying Meisus, the 1st and the 2nd year, so in the 3rd year he has to bring it to Yerushalayim, and then he makes a confession, meaning he admits, he liquidates, he says, Be'arta kodesh nabayis, and if he didn't bring it, then he has to get rid of it wherever it is. Rabbi Shimon point. Rabbi Shimon says we're going to Bikurim, that one is pater from doing beer. Okay, that's the Mishnah in the Sefer. So again, we have these things that Meiser and Bikurim have in common. They go to Yerushalayim, they need Avidui, they've been into an Einim, that's a machlekes, chayim beer, that's a machlekes, but Al-Kabanim, Mashek B'Truma, can be eaten anywhere, doesn't require Avidui, maybe eaten by an Einim, does not require a beer. Says the Gemara, Ve'ilu, now whereas, according to Tanna Kama, who compares Bikurim for all halachas, it should have said that Asur levar mehen b'tumah, that you're not allowed to get rid of it in the state of tumah, meaning, let's say these food items became tummy, and you want to use them as fuel, where the fact that it became tumah does not permit it to now burn it up. In other words, we don't say that even though Meiser was only given over for eating and drinking and smearing, like the pasuk v'achalta, maybe you would say, oh, that's only when it's tar. It's tar, it's food. The Torah only gave you permission to eat it. But when it became tummy, when it's not edible anyway, you can't eat it because you're not allowed to eat it when it becomes tummy, so use it as fuel. Rather, no, it's forbidden to go ahead and burn it in a state of tumah, as the pasuk actually says, that I did not liquidate it in a state of tumah. In contrast to truma, where the Torah, as the Gemara is going to explain later on, permits you to burn it in the state of tumah. You can't eat it, so it permits you to consume in the state of tumah. So the Gemara is in the middle of a conversation. Now, whereas to say that it's forbidden to liquidate the truma, the meiser and bikurim in the state of tumah, and as we continue to there's one more thing, and to eat them when the person is tar, but the meiser itself is tummy, to say that loika, that you would get lashes, as the Gemara is going to teach us later on, masha'en came by truma, which does not apply by truma, because by truma, you're not forbidden to have the truma when the truma is tamei. It's only forbidden when the person is tamei. As the pasuk teaches, b'kadashim lo yoichel. But when the truma itself is tamei, we don't find the prohibition in the Torah. Yes, it's an isra say, which means say you're not allowed to eat truma that's tamei, but that's only derived from a positive commandment, what you should do, so we derive what you should not do, as the Gemara is explained later on. But that wouldn't give you lashes. So that, these two cases, loy katani, the Mishnah doesn't say, and these are two, as the Gemara will explain shortly, these are two cases that there are differences, meaning Meiser and Bikurim both have these two halachas. Has halacha that you're not allowed to use it as, let's say, fuel. Let's say the wine of Meiser and Bikurim became tamei. You're not allowed to use it as like to burn it or to do some other type of liquidation. And so too, if you ate it when the tumah of the Meiser Bikurim was tumah, you would get lashes, which does not apply by truma. Truma, those two halachas doesn't apply. Truma, if one would eat it when the truma is tumah, he would not get lashes. And actually, you're allowed to. The Torah lets you take that tumah truma and burn it and not eat it. Lo katani, says the Gemara, al matan b'shayim. So obviously, we see that the Mishnah didn't teach everything. It left over certain cases. And therefore you could say, not like Rav Sheshes. Maybe an oral is actually permitted to eat Meiser Sheni. So why didn't we say that there's a difference between Truma Bikurim and Meiser Sheni? Tana B'Shai. We didn't say anything about Proof of Seva with these two cases were mentioned, and then we don't have a raya yet regarding the halacha of oral being forbidden Meiser Sheni, the way Rav Sheshes wanted to bring from this Mishnah Mesechtes Bikurim. Now, the Gemara goes back to this Mishnah in Bikurim and discusses it once we introduced it. The Mishnah said that regarding Meiser Sheni and Bikurim, it's Vasurin Ba'oin. It's forbidden for an Ein. Ein is someone who lost his relative that day and then he passed away. So Meiser Sheni and Bikurim are forbidden for Ein, Masha Einkein B'Truma. Rabbi Shimon says no, it's not true. He permits by Bikurim to be eaten by an Ein. So first the Gemara says Banalahu. The Rabbanan who say that it's forbidden for an Ein to eat Bikurim, where do they get this from? Says the Gemara because the Chsiv. Says the pasuk in Devar. Says Lisucha lechol b'sharecha. You cannot eat it in your towns. Masa degancha b'sireishcha b'tzerecha v'goyim, the tithing of your grain and your wine and your oil, etc. Where that we know we have to bring it up to Yerushalayim. Now, when it says in the pasuk with trumas yodecha and the truma of your hands, what does that mean? So B'amamar, the master says, and this is in the Mesechtes Makkos of Yitzayim and Aleph, trumas yodecha elu bikurim. This is Bikurim, and this is where Taisa says it because it says over there, Yodecha, we see the word Yodecha is by Bikurim, so therefore that's when we're saying Trumas Yodecha is going to refer to that of Bikurim, which, meaning the pasuk is telling you, it has to be brought to Yerushalayim. You can't eat it in your gate, like it says, V'samta Batena Balachta. Now, so why do you need two psukim? So Rashi says, that's V'samta Batena Balachta is telling you mitzvah saying. And here he's telling you a negative prohibition not to eat it out of Yerushalayim. Because in contrast, regular truma, that's called truma of gvul, could be eaten out of Yerushalayim. This does not need to be within the wall of Yerushalayim. So rather, this is referring to Bikur. Now, in this pasuk, ve'iskish Bikurim l'maiser. The pasuk is comparing Trumas Yidechel to Bikurim, and Meiser, which is mentioned there in the beginning of the pasuk, of Meiser begun to search of Yitzrecha. What is the comparison coming to teach me? Ma Maser, just like Meiser. Also la'aynan, that we know is clearly the pasuk of the Vida Meiser says leichalti be'la'aynan mimenu. Af Bikurim also la'aynan. Oh, that's where the Rabbana get this from in this Mishnah Bikurim, that it's going to be forbidden for an aynan to eat Bikurim. Rabbi Shimon, why does he say that Bikurim is permitted for an aynan? Because yes, although the pasuk is being makish them, but Truma karin rechmana, but the pasuk is calling Bikurim Trumas Yodecha. It's calling it Truma. So ma Truma materes la'aynan, just like Truma is permitted for Einin, like the Gemara said in the beginning of this paragraph of Ayin Mag Beis, that when it says V'zar lo yoichel, it's saying Zara samarti lach v'lo yanenis, that Einin is not prohibited in Truma. So Bikurim, so the Bikurim is going to be permitted for Einin because it's called Truma. What it's called is more important than the Hekesh that you're making. Now, the next case we had a machlekes in that same Mishnah was regarding Meiser Sheni and Bikurim. He said B'chayav and B'bir. That you have to do beer, you have to liquidate what you have when the time is over and you still have it in your possession, you have to get rid of it. That's both by Meiser Sheni and by Bikurim. Rabbi Shimon says no, that's by Meiser Sheni but not by Bikurim. So the Gemara explains similarly. Mar, the Tanakama, he's makish, he compares Bikurim to Meiser, like it says, Biarti HaKodesh. Just like Meiser, so to Bikurim, because the pasuk compares them to. Umar, lo makish, but Rabbi Shimon does not compare them, where here Taisa says, for the same reason, because the Torah calls Bikurim Trumas Yodecha, just like Truma does not have the halacha of biur, so too Bikurim does not have the halacha of biur. Now, additionally, we mentioned that there's two cases that the Tana left out in the Mishnah Mesechtes Bikurim that applies both by Meiser Sheni and Bikurim and does not apply by Truma. We said v'asur lavar mehen, that you're not allowed to get rid of them, you're not allowed to, let's say, burn them up. Meiser Sheni and Bikurim bit Tuma, in the state of Tuma. And the second halacha was, although we didn't say, but this was from the Tana of shiur, but if you eat the peiros when the peiros themselves are tamei, you're going to get lashes in contrast to Truma. Says Imam Manal, where do we know those two halachas, again that weren't mentioned, but they were the Tana of shiur, where do we know them from? Tana of the price. Shimon Omer, he says, the pasuk says, by Vida Meiser, which is the confession the person makes. He says, I got rid of everything, I took it out of my house, I'm done with it. So in that confession he says, I did not get rid of it in the state of Tumah. which that sounds like, says Reb Shimon. Bein sha'ani tamei b'hutar, whether I was tamei, says the person, and the meiser was tar, or bein sha'ani tar b'hutamei, whether I was tar and the meiser was tamei, he's confessing that he did not burn it in the fire, and he did not use it to light a candle, meaning when it was tamei, and for sure when it was tar, because to the contrary, as Rashi explains, we know that Meiser Sheni was only given to be eaten, to drink, and to anoint, as the Mishnah says in Meiser Sheni, Mesechta Meiser Sheni. Now, actually, therefore, we understand that we wouldn't need the person to confess regarding Meiser Sheni that was tahar, that he wasn't mavarit, because you have no rights for that. That's only regarding for eating and drinking. So obviously, what is the person saying when he's saying, I was not mavarit, that even when it was tameh, where I couldn't eat it, I still didn't give it over for using it as fuel to light a candle with it. So you have the tameh oil, what are you going to do with it? Even then, lo bi'arti, he says, when b'menda b'tameh, is even then when it was tameh. Now obviously the inference is that you cannot eat it in tumah. Says the Brisa, v'heichin muzar ala filasai. Where is the prohibition regarding eating the pre when it is tummy? Says Reb Shimon says any day. He says I don't know, meaning it's not explicit in the Torah that you're not allowed to eat the meiser when it's tummy. Therefore, as we're going to shortly explain, he needed a pasuk of leisuchol lechol b'sherecha. But before he had a chance to finish his words, the Gemara jumps in and asks, that says, what? Tumas hagov, when the body is tamei, behedik sibbe, is explicit pasuk in Vayikra. Why are you saying any yedea? It says, nefesh ashatiga boy, if a soul is going to touch the source of a tama, the person is going to be tamei till the evening, so v'lo yoichel min HaKadashim, then he should not eat from the holy things, which the Gemara later on in this parak, in the next daf, and the basic, is going to explain that the pasuk actually talking about meiser. So he's not eating from the meiser, unless he washed his flesh in water. Now the way we know it's actually talking about meiser is because it sounds like at the moment that you toivel, you already tahar, and that you don't need to have hair of shemesh. You don't have to wait for sundown. What's the type of kodesh that it's enough with just toiveling without even sundown is meiser shem. But be that as it may, so the Gemara is wondering, why is Reb Shimon saying, I don't know the source, that you cannot eat meiser sheni and tumah? It's explicit pasuk in the Torah that you cannot eat from the holy things, which is meiser sheni, until you toivel, which obviously that you cannot eat in the state of tumah. Says Yevamos Daf. The question of the Tana of Reb Shimon was, Tumas atzmoi, not Tumas aguf. When the person is tamei himself, there's a pasuk in the Torah, daf toivelim. But when he's tar, but the meiser sheni itself is tamei, where do you know that you cannot eat it when you are tar? Which Shays discusses is, what do you mean? Don't they contaminate each other when he's coming to eat it? Anyways, Shays says when they push it down into his throat, where he's not going to be touching it when he's eating it. But be that as an may, that's what Tamalam, that's what you need the pasuk that says, Leisucha lechol b'sharecha, meiser degancha. You cannot eat in your towns, meiser degancha. Now, the simple translation of this pasuk, as we mentioned before, is that you can't eat meiser sheni out of Yerushalayim, can't be in your own shar, has to be in Yerushalayim. But we learned out something else from the word b'sharecha. Because there's a pasuk in Devarim that's by what's called psul hamikdashim. Psul hamikdashim is if a carbon mikdashim became possible, became invalid. So what do you do with it? So after it was redeemed, you deconsecrate its sanctity of that former carbon onto other funds. Those funds become traders. They can use it to buy your new carbon because they have the old carbon. Now that formerly sanctified animal is called psul hamikdashim. A zar, a non-kohen is allowed to eat it now because it doesn't have the sanctity, but there's still certain limitations on it. You can't shear the wool. There's certain things you're not allowed to do. But still, says the Torah, in your towns you can eat it. Hatamei v'atar yachtav, the tummy person and the Torah person together. Katzvi v'cha'ayol, like a deer and like a hart. You could treat it like a regular animal, at least in this regard regarding to eating it. So on that says the Rabbi Shloimy, he taught like this. He says, Afilat tamei v'tar, oichel shulchan echad. That means even the tummy person and the Torah person are allowed to eat on one table, because from the same plate. And we don't have to be concerned. That's what the pasuk is telling you over here by Psulim Mikdashim. When it says B'sharecha techleno hatam v'atar, yeah, we don't care if it becomes tummy. The tummy could eat it together. Now, on that is what Kamer Rachman Torah is telling you. Hahu, that B'sharecha. The Amri Lachasim that I told you over there, B'sharecha techleno, that I said is permitted for the tar to eat that Psuli HaMikdashim after the tummy person already touched the food on the plate and it became tummy. Right? That's what the pasuk teaching about Psuli HaMikdashim. That's what I told you, but Hach over here by Meister Sheni, that it also says Bishorecha loy teichel. Don't eat Bishorecha. So again, Bishorecha doesn't only mean don't eat it in your towns. Yenim Bishorecha of the Psuli HaMikdashim that I let you have Tamah V'Tar Yachtav, which obviously is becoming tummy because the guy's sticking his hands into the pupa platter and it's becoming tummy, and then the entire person's eating right after him was givaron tummy, but that's okay because Psuli HaMikdash, I don't care if it's becoming tummy. That Bishorecha over here by Meiser Sheni, that is what I'm telling you. The pasuk tells you Bishorecha, that it says the same word like Suchalecha Bishorecha Meiser Dikancha. That Bishorecha of it becoming tummy, that you cannot eat regarding Meiser Sheni. That's the source of the halacha that Meiser Sheni Shenitma, that you're not allowed to eat even if you're tahar. So that's the source for the Isser of Meiser Sheni that became Tameh, that one's not allowed to eat. Now the Gemara continues, we said in that Mishnah, Mashenki B'Truma, whereas although that Meiser Sheni and Bikurim have this halacha of it's forbidden to eat it when it itself is Tameh, but Truma is not like that. Truma, you're allowed to burn it. Those two halachas do not apply by Truma. The halacha of eating it when it's Tameh, you're not going to get lashed by Truma. And those are, you're allowed to burn it when it became Tameh. Those two halachas do not apply by Truma. It says the Gemara, Mashing b'Truma Menala. Where do we know that actually by Truma, which first discusses, well, why would you think that it would be us if the third doesn't say it? Why do I need a source that it's mutter? So let's discuss it. Maybe you would have learned it from Meiser Hakal. But be that as it may, how do you know that Truma, these two things are going to be permitted? Some of the Yevamos Daf says, because the pasuk says by Meiser Sheni, Lo be'arti mimenu b'tameh, that I did not consume it in the state of tummy. Now that teaches you that mimenu atamav, that from the Meiser Sheni you cannot burn it in the state of tummy. Avol atamav shemesh al truma shenitma. The dik mimenu is telling you only over here, but somewhere else, let's say by the halacha of truma, then you could burn it up in the state of tummy. Says maybe say mimenu atamav, maybe say a different deer. Maybe say by Meiser Sheni, Yevaminu is telling you exclusionary terminology. Meiser Sheni you cannot burn it in the state of tumah, but maybe you could go ahead and liquidate it when it's kadshim. For example, let's say they were sanctified for the benachis and it became tamei. Maybe that's what we're saying, that you could burn in the state of tumah. Who said that the dik is for regarding truma? So it's isn't it kavachayim? But mama isakal if regarding meiser which is a lenient halacha. Torah is telling you, you have to make a confession. I did not burn it up when it became tamei. So kodesh chamal kashkin, kachim which is more severe, isn't it all the more so that for sure you're not going to go ahead and just use it as fuel when it becomes tamei? Says you have to get truma nami kavachayim. Truma is also more severe than meiser. Why don't you say the same kavachayim? Then truma is going to be aser. Says Gemara, no, said mimeno. It says mimeno. Mimeno tells you from meiser and not from something else. Says Gemara, marisa. What do you see? How are you telling me that you have one miyut and one ribui? Because the riba is a kavachayim, and the miyut is mimeno. So how do you see the fit to tell me that kachim will be aser from the kavachayim, but trum will be mutter from the miyut of mimeno? Where do you get that differentiation? Remember, it's logical that kodesh loyim matina. That we're not going to exclude kachim from the isser, meaning it's going to remain with the isser like meiser has. Shekain, because we find certain stringencies by kachim that we do not have a truma. You have penkeches. Sounds like a Hungarian word, but it's a mnemonic for the following things that only apply by kachim. The pay is pigul, which is when you're in the middle of doing the avodah by the kachim. If you have in mind that you want it to be eaten chutz zman, beyond its time that you're allowed to eat it, that makes it intrinsically possible. That's only something that applies by kachim. Nicer, if it was left over the time that you're allowed to eat it, it becomes also intrinsically asur, something that doesn't apply by truma either. Carbon, it's called a carbon that you bring it within the area of the Beis Hamikdash which is a specific halacha that is required by karbanis. And it also has me'ilah, which is if someone by mistake has benefit from the carbon, he's liable for the laws of me'ilah. And the kares, if someone eats the kachim when his body is tamei, he's liable for the death penalty of kares, dying at a young age, and his kids die. And also, kachim is forbidden for an einan, which all these things do not apply by truma. So therefore, it would be more mistabed that the chumrah of meiser would be for kachim, not for truma. So to the contrary, truma le'mamatina. Maybe don't exclude truma. Shkin machpas, which that's an acronym for misa, which is, it discusses what do you mean misa in contrast to kares. It's not really contrasting to that of kares. But al kapanim, it is a stringency, at least for truma itself, that if someone eats truma with his own physical body tumah, it says in the pasuk of Yikra Chabez that he's going to die because he desecrated. And b'chaimish, that a non-kohen who eats by mistake truma, he's always going to be chayv b'chaimish. In contrast, meaning even though it's permitted for the kahanim, contrast by kachim, you're right. Although kachim also has halach of chaimish, but from the moment it becomes permitted for kahanim, there's no me'ilah and no chaimish. So that's a stringency that truma has. Truma is always going to have a chaimish, even when it's permitted for the kahanim. And in lapidya, there's no redemption for truma. In contrast, we do find redemption by kachim. If it wasn't yet sanctified in the vessel and has only kedushas damim and not kedushas haguf, we do have redemption for kachim. And vasur lazarim. All types of truma is forbidden for a non-kohen. In contrast, kachim kalim, like a shlamim, is permitted for a non-kohen. So maybe say that truma is the more severe one. So the Gemara, no, hanach nafishim. The stringency of kachim are more than the laws of truma, and we're going to be machmer and include from the kavochem, it's going to be kachim, not truma. Or if you want, you could say another approach, karas adiva. From all those, karas is such a severe one that it trumps them all. And therefore, we're going to say that that's going to be the severity factor that's going to indicate that it's going to be kachim that's included, and not that of truma. Now, we said in the Gemara before that the second item was if someone eats the ma'aser shein b'kurim, when the ma'aser shein b'kurim themselves are tamei, like the person will get lashes. In contrast, for truma, which that was the second case that was left over, if one ate truma when the truma is tamei, he would not get lashes. Now the Gemara makes an interesting deep. Milkahu de lucky. Yes, sounds like that if someone ate when the truma, if someone's tar, a kohen's tar, and he eats truma that's tamei, he wouldn't get lashes. Sounds like shiur ikka, but there is at least a prohibition to eat the truma that's tamei. But no, where do we know that from? Where do we know that there is at least an isser, just not malchus, of eating truma that's tamei? Because Amakar the pasuk says regarding a bechar balmum. Allah is the firstborn animal to be brought as a korban given to the kohen. If it develops a blemish, it's still given to the kohen, but it says b'sharecha teichlenu, that okay, you could eat this in your towns, which is that's where we say it doesn't have the halacha as a korban. Now, what that teaching me is lazeh. For this, where we have the bechar that's invalid, then you could have it when it is hatame v'atar yachtav. Because psulim mikdashim, which is the bechar balmum, you could eat it when it's tummy. But when you're saying tichlenu, it you could eat is a miut. Oh, lazeh v'la'achar, which is excluding truma. That truma, when truma becomes tamei, you're not allowed to eat it b'shadecha hatame v'atar yachtav, because the truma cannot be eaten when it is tamei. Now, that's malav b'machlal. I say, that's a negative prohibition derived from a positive commandment, saying this you could eat in the state of tumah, or something else you cannot. But that's derived from the positive commandment. Positive commandment is a prohibition, but it's not malchus, because malchus is only for Allah. So that's the source where we know that truma that became tamei is going to be forbidden to eat, but it's not going to get lashes. Now, the Gemara just concludes the conversation we had on the Manal. We start off the Daf with Rav Sheish trying to prove that an oral is going to be usher to eat meiser. Why? If we didn't say it in the cases of a stringency of truma and bekurim over meiser, you should have said truma and bekurim, we know it's forbidden for oral, so then meiser is mutter. In fact, you didn't say it. Obviously it's usher. So the Gemara says, no raya, because Tana B'Shayr. Now, what was the Tana B'Shayr? The Tana B'Shayr was only from the Seifa. We brought the other cases in the Mishnah, and we said, in those cases of meiser and bekurim versus truma, we left out two cases. Also then by the ratio, when we talk about truma and bekurim versus meiser, that we also left out. That the Gemara just concludes and says, Amar Rav Ashi says, Meresha Namisham. You don't have to come out to the Sefer. Even the ratio you also can prove the halacha was the ton of a shayr. Why? Because like a ton of we didn't teach at the Ketintam of Ayin Dalam and Aleph. Other cases, even in the Reisha, you could have said V'noigin that Truma and Bikurim apply b'shar Shnei Shavua all the years of the Shemitah cycle. Conscious Meiser Sheni is only in the. It does not apply by the 3rd and the 6th year, because then you give Meiser Ani. And also the Eilam Pidyon. We could have said that Truma and Bikurim you cannot redeem, Mashiach give a Meiser, which you could redeem. But Shema Minah, obviously, we left out cases even in the Reisha, and you could even prove Ton of Shayur to reject Rav Sheshes Raya. You don't have to come on to the Seder, come on even to the Reisha. Thank you to any time.